Hello. Well, I'm going live now as a continuation of yesterday's video, and it's too bad I had a good night's sleep after this because I can't remember as vividly what I thought of wanting to continue or elaborate on as or emphasize, but I'll try my best to do it anyway. In particular, I remember thinking, why is it that when I go, why is it that I ask on Twitter, could there be corruption in the studies done allegedly showing black people as having smaller brains and less intelligence? And then I ask, how did they select the population studied? In another parallel post, which Twitter also censored, I mentioned how academia wants herd-like individuals. And for instance, they kicked out my mother, who was the smartest, but also not a herd thinker and not the type of person inclined to go along with the terrible corruption that they were doing in nutrition in the 60s, where they basically tried to tell us to all eat high sugar, high carbohydrate foods, just because of the food companies gave them money to say that. And of course, we now have our obesity epidemic, which everyone agrees is quite partly because of those nutrition fraud, which those studies repeatedly got debunked. Before they were debunked, my mother was telling me in the 80s as a kid, I know this is all wrong. I worked at the Harvard School of Public Health, and about the donations. And this would be like we would go visit Phyllis Phillips in Maine, or I forgot who it was. Maybe it's another name. There was a woman who was deprived of oxygen. Her husband had high cholesterol and she wasn't going to eat eggs, and I remember that. And then I remember my mother saying afterwards, that's all wrong, but not in front of them, only when we were home alone. So, and I know that, I am a very intellectual person who has this fascination for and love of science and discovery and all that and creativity. And I would hate it, the idea of being forced to go along with fraud. And I'm just not the type of person who could go along with fraud like that. So what type of person could? I mean, and are they going to be the smartest people out there? And if academia goes, and so let's ask what goes on with race. I know for a fact, and have evidence to establish it, that like in Dorchester, they're repeatedly doing Nazi-style unethical medical experiments on black populations for the benefit of Harvard Medical School. And that is a big way Harvard gets so many corporate donations. Corporations give money for Harvard to study something that they potentially might be able to make a profit off of. And it's extremely important. It really helps them make that profit for a number of reasons. Even if, for instance, if it turns out to be a bad product and they don't want it to go on the market because it's going to have side effects that eventually come back to haunt them and they get sued, they want to know about that first, secretly. After all, if they were not negligent and they put a bad product out in the market without knowing, then they weren't negligent and they can't get sued. So if they do the study with the mafia on black people and they discover it's going to cause a problem later on, but will make a lot of money at first, Harvard will cover that up for them. Collude and be complicit with putting a bad product out on the market that causes problems. And they might even, knowing what the problems are, make a deal with companies that are going to profit off of fixing those problems. Like if it's high cancer rates, that it'll cause. If it's diabetes, Harvard will hit up the corporations benefiting from diabetes treatments or cancer treatments for a donation because of what wonderful thing they just did, covering up this research and helping this other corporation cover up this research, and then endorsing the product that they know is going to help raise those revenues. And I mean, if you did a study of what the medical disparities between poor Black people and, middle class people and upper middle class people and the rich, who gets what, drugs or whatever, you can kind of figure out what the truth is. For instance, neuroleptics for alleged schizophrenia are prescribed to poor Black people at astronomically high rates compared to whites, who get diagnosed on average with schizophrenia at a rate 5 times that of white people. And there is no way that that's valid. But I mean, just figure it out. Those drugs are awful. And so anyway, you have that issue. But the question is, what type of people? So if they're doing studies of Black people compared to white people, and they're using the Black population for this type of stuff, where do they get, how do Black people advance in academia and in other parts of society? Do they get the best people out there, the best and the brightest, the ones who have the most energy and creativity and stamina and sense of determination, and I want to do good in this world? Or do they get insecure people who are insecure because of, they're not the brightest bulbs out there? How do they select for the populations they study? That is extremely important, actually, because it is actually very true that and I diverted into the whole issue of studying gender in the brain, because homosexuality is an area where people differ from the gendered norm in terms of who they are attracted to, but it is also true that they differ from the gendered norm in terms of how they talk, as well as in their interests and what occupations they are drawn to. And I believe you would find that it all goes together. If a gay man is a more masculine gay man, he's also more attracted to sports, military, police, truck drivers, auto mechanics, all the uniforms, all those, just look at the gay porn that's out there. That's what you'll see. Whereas the more feminine gay men who talk more feminine are also the ones who are the interior designers, the hairdressers, the, feminine occupations. They are the ones who major in the humanities in colleges. And they also are the ones who end up in joining the charities and activist organizations, gay activist organizations that happen to be corporate funded, corporate controlled, and corrupt in this other way. Well, given the degree of ghettoization and selection that goes on, how did they find the Black people that they studied, and in comparison to the white people, where did they get them from? Did they do an ad? Did they, how do they select for them? That if a society is systematically racist, and part of that racism is they want dumber people, when Black people are put in positions of control or authority over others, they are not the smart. They do not want the smartest ones. They do not want uppity Blacks, and the smart ones are going to be more uppity. Then yeah, you're going to go study black versus white brains, and you'll find that the white people are the smarter ones, depending on how you get them. And so if we don't know how they selected for those people, we're not going to find out. Another issue is also I would hook up with black men sometimes in the bad areas of Dorchester, and was quite impressed by how smart some of them were in terms of the communication skills, the smoothness of their communication skills. And that was like, wow. And actually, how well you talk is extremely important to where you get in society, so long as you are not part of that underclass. If you look at the white people who are part of the elites, who get somewhere in society, who become influential, those who talk smoothly like that, and with that, and I use the word smooth because I don't know if there's a better way to, our society doesn't even have a language to discuss these language differences between different people and why they're important, and why do they have a huge impact on where people get in life, but they do. So but yeah, now though, so I speak to those black men, and it's like, and I'm awkward with speech, and I had, or sometimes awkward, and if I'm not in practice, it's as if I'm having developed a lot of my language skills after the age of 15. If I'm not in practice, it's like a foreign language that goes dormant, and it doesn't stay dormant, but it does go dormant with enough isolation. So that made me kind of like a canary in a coal mine in terms of who am I talking to and how good are their language skills, which isn't just what words you speak, but it's like body language, but it's not body language. It's the equivalent of the body language you do with your tone, with your inflection, with your how you go up and down, the same aspect of speech where that we hear and pick up on when we call some gay men queenie or flaming. That aspect of speech, when they're flaming, it's as if they're doing what some women do partially, but they're kind of doing it wrong. It's like we don't like it, and it's as if who knows how they learned to talk. Maybe they wanted to talk feminine, and I wonder if they just didn't have stay-at-home mothers, and if you're in daycare, a traditional daycare setting with where your speech is not developed with one-on-one communication with the same adult mother, then you as a gay man are trying to learn to talk feminine. You don't know that you're trying to, but your brain is wired up to have you adopt that partially feminine inflection, but not completely. And there is no audience. You have to kind of, like, if you're a gay man and you do that femininity right, people actually don't dislike it. People, if anything, might even like it a little bit. But if you're a gay man and you do it wrong, they don't like it. And I think a mother would go kind of hear the baby, not even understand, because a child doesn't necessarily talk feminine. And her response is going to be a little bit more cold if the femininity is done wrong, and a little bit more positive, or a lot more positive if it's done right, which reinforces doing it right. Meaning, you have the masculine part of your speech, like the way you say a word, some of it's masculine, and then all of a sudden you have this little extra feminine lilt where you go, when all other men don't do that. If you do it just right and you're a gay man, it's not, well, see, I've talked to gay men who kind of do that a little bit, and I respond to that positively. It even turns me on sexually. As if, well, see, I'm a masculine gay man, so it's as if I am turned on by some aspects of femininity, but it has to be done right. Um, anyway, oh, where am I? See, the rat poison incident, of course, makes me. So why am I here? Why did I say that was important? Um, so that is an area where, why did I digress from black brains and self-selection, or how were the populations selected for, to the gay men? Well, okay, and then gender, when they study, oh yes, academia is trying to say there are zero gender differences in the brains other than it's all socially constructed. Now, there are some that say there actually were gender differences. In particular, the size of the brain is different in men. But then other things they try to study, there are not. Or they can, or there may be sometimes, but there's overlap and stuff. Well, here is where I'm like, wait a minute, how do they select for the brains, the men and women? Do they know their sexuality? Not necessarily. If they don't know their sexuality, why don't they select for them based on how they talk? And you have to go, at that point, you have to start categorizing what are the different verbal types of people out there. There is, okay, there's me, and the way, how do I talk? I talk very fast, smooth, and the expressivity with how I talk is, compare that to like a truck driver who is always this, like they call them man of few words. Some of those blue collar men who just don't talk much, or just they all talk the same, and it's very wooden and very crude. And they can't do that, you know. Well, you know how you talk to an animal. Oh no, I can't say, I can't fake it. I have to have an animal right there. I'm saying, hello there, hello there. You know, you're going up and down with your speech like you're singing. It's, yeah. How much of your speech when you talk is like singing, and how much of it is wooden like speech? So I talk in a smooth way that's much more like singing compared to a lot of other verbal people. But in a masculine or straight acting way, which means it's possible to be masculine and be like that. Whereas among some people, that's women are more like that and men are not, among some populations. So they really should go group them according to, is this the man or the woman? And then if you're a man, how do you talk? And group all the men who talk group them according to how they talk, and the women. And then, because some women talk in the, traditional gender role way where they are very feminine, and some talk where it's still feminine, but they're more like wordy and intellectual and stuff, and almost assertive. They're assertive women. They talk in an assertive way. Bossy, sometimes you could say. Well, you should categorize them by how they talk, select, and then study each category separately and see if there's brain differences that show up depending on how you talk. And then study whether there's brain differences between men and women. And then, maybe if you compare a man who talks very masculine, the brain, to a woman like the truck driver man who has somewhat limited speech, crude speech, study his brain, and then study the brain of a more what you'd call submissive traditional gender role woman, and then the more assertive verbal traditional gender role woman, and then see if you have differences. However, meanwhile, okay, I need to stop now because I'm going to get a phone call. But okay, how do I stop? End stream.